This is Ray Stokes in the Special Collections section of the TCOM Library on Tuesday, the 15th of November, 1988. Today I have a very special guest, one that I'm very delighted to recognize and to say that in all probability, this distinguished person has done more to improve the concept and growth of osteopathic medicine than any person that I think is living today. This person I refer to is Dr. Irvin M. Korr. Dr. Korr, for example, has another distinction because, believe it or not, Dr. Korr is not a DO, yet he has done more to promote osteopathy than any person that I can think of. So, Dr. Korr, it's my pleasure to visit with you here today and to kind of first get a little idea. Of course, your name is Irvin M., but you go by a nickname by the name of Kim. And I'm rather anxious to learn I've called you Kim now for the 10 years that I've known you, but I'd like to know where you got the Kim. How'd they hang that on to you?
It comes from my initials, as it appears in alphabetical listings, Korr, I.M.
Korr, I.M.
And
that's right.
I was never very comfortable with my name, Irvin, having been raised in Philadelphia, where it was pronounced Oif when it was shortened. And many years later, when I was at New York University, a friend of mine, a colleague, said I.W. Kim. It seems to fit you very well, and I've been comfortable with it ever since, for more than 50 years.
Tell you what I'd like to do, if I could. I'd like to refer to an article that was written about you by a very good friend of ours, Judy Alter. Forgive me, I didn't mean to say Slagle, but Judy Alter, who is a Fort Worth writer and author, and she wrote a very fine article about you back when you first joined TCOM back about 1978 or 79. I'd like to read what she had to say, at least an excerpt of the first two paragraphs in this particular article. Irvin M. Korr, Ph.D., began his association with osteopathic medicine and scientific research, and through a long and distinguished career, he has become known as a major contributor to the modern scientific understanding of the profession's distinctive contribution to the field of medicine. The impact of his work has been felt in basic research areas and in clinical medicine, but the importance of Dr. Korr's career and his writings goes beyond scientific research to embrace both teaching and philosophy. Both in the classroom and in areas such as curriculum planning, he has become renowned for his knowledge and insight into the special problems of osteopathic education. Further, he has established himself in writing and at the lectern as one of the most articulate exponents of the profession, the philosopher who brings to the osteopathic concept a blend of understanding, wisdom, and enthusiasm for his subject. Now, in essence, that pretty well tells the story of the accomplishments that Dr. Korr, Kim, as I'm going to say in the future, has performed. What I'd like to do, Dr. Kim, is to kind of divide your life into at least four parts. The beginning, of course, I understand you got your BA degree at Pittsburgh, the University of Pennsylvania. It's in the wrong city. University of Pennsylvania, and then you got both your bachelor and your master's degree there. Then you got your at Princeton, you got your doctorate. What year was that?
1935.
1935. Would you kind of give us a little bit of an idea of what your first introduction after you got your degree in physiology? What was your first job that you had?
Well, after I received my degree, I took a postdoctoral fellowship at Princeton University, And in the fall of 1936, I was appointed to the faculty of the New York University School of Medicine in the Department of Physiology.
And that was your first introduction to medicine, per se?
Aside from being a patient or my family being a patient.
Right, I understand.
Yes. Yes, my first experience in the teaching of medical physiology. My training at Princeton was in cellular physiology, more fundamental than human physiology. So I acquired my knowledge in human physiology while teaching it.
I see. Then you went from there, after teaching there at New York University. I understand during World War II you worked for the Department of War
That's
Department.
Right.
Would you tell me something about your chores there, your assignment?
Yes, in 1942, having joined the faculty at New York University in 1936, I took a leave of absence to engage in research in aviation medicine in New York City on Welfare Island. And our job was to prepare pilots or develop techniques that would enable pilots to fly as high as their airplanes could fly. Specifically, we dealt with the pilots of the Thunderbolt, the P-47, which is one of our best fighter planes at the time, which had a ceiling well above 50,000 feet. But the human ceiling didn't begin to approach 50,000 feet because the cabins were not pressurized in those days, and the atmospheric pressure at those altitudes is so small that even while breathing pure oxygen, the blood simply does not pick up enough oxygen to maintain consciousness and perhaps even life for more than a few minutes. So that was my first project, and we did produce some techniques that were very helpful. The next one, I was transferred to Fort Monmouth, New Jersey, where I undertook climatic research for what was then called the Signal Corps. It no longer exists as a separate body, dealing with communications during warfare.
Did you have a commission, or were you?
No, I was a civilian.
I
I was in civil service, and my title was senior physiologist.
I see.
And the work there was concerned with preparing enlisted men to serve in extremes of climate in the Arctic area, in jungles and in deserts and tropical areas and so forth.
And you had something to do with some of us that had to go to Guadalcanal then, huh?
I presume I did, yes. I hope you benefited from
I hope so. I know I did. I'm here.
So my final project was under the Ordnance Department, where my job, along with my colleagues, was to develop better ways of killing people, which did not make me very happy as a biologist, but that was my assignment. Specifically, we were studying the ballistic properties, this sounds horrid, of human flesh. And we developed and used techniques which could study the penetrability of various tissues by high-speed missiles. The ultimate objective was to develop more effective fragmentation bombs, which would do more damage than those we had. And that project ended in the spring of 1945, when once more I was released to return to academic life.
I see. And returning to academic life, tell me then, Kim, how did you become introduced to osteopathy?
Purely accidentally.
All right.
As was the practice in those days, when you were looking for an academic position, you wrote to distinguished people with whom you'd become acquainted or hoped to become acquainted, and sort of announced your availability, hoping that somebody would respond or refer you to somebody who would respond. And so I did that to a number of people at very fine universities. I should have said that by this time we had a young lad of 2, and my wife and I had decided we would not return to New York City. We wanted to bring him up in another environment. even though my wife had been born and raised in Manhattan, New York City.
Uh-huh.
And so one of the first responses I had, even though I had not addressed Kirksville College of Osteopathic Medicine, then known as the Kirksville College of Osteopathy and Surgery, KCOS, one of the first responses was from the gentleman named John Stedman Denslow, D.O., who was professor of osteopathic principles and technique at the time, inviting me to consider appointment to the faculty. At the time, I knew nothing about osteopathy, except that presumably, because of the first syllable, it had something to do with bones, and I wasn't especially interested in bones. And so I let the letter sit. I had no intention of responding because it seemed rather remote from my interests, until I received a telephone call from one of the distinguished physiologists to whom I had written. And it turned out it was he who had referred me, who had recommended me to the Kirksville College. And he had helped train Dr. Denslow in research methods. Denslow graduated at a time, 1929, from the Kirksville College, when one went directly from high school to professional school. And so his scientific training was very limited, to say the least. And Dr. Ralph Gerard, then of the University of Michigan, was one of the persons who gave him his experimental training in physiology. And so Gerard called and asked me why I had not responded to Kirksville. And I said, well, why would I? And he said that there was something very exciting there. He'd been a visitor to the college. He didn't understand everything he saw there, but there was no question of the total integrity and dedication of these people to this laying down scientific foundations of medicine. And he had recommended me, as he said, and as I was confirmed later by, when I saw some old correspondence years later, he had recommended me because I was, as he said, an incisive experimenter, but also I had what he called an uninhibited mind. I wasn't frightened very much by auspices or by what will people think. And so that was the reason that I was approached on that. And I still was very reluctant. And he said, would you be persuaded if Dr. Alan Gregg phoned you? Dr. Gregg was then Vice President for Medical Affairs at Rockefeller Foundation. A very distinguished man, not only a physician himself, but a medical statesman of the highest sort, whom I had admired for many years. And I said, well, I certainly would listen to him. And sure enough, Dr. Gregg called me from New York. I was then living in Red Bank, New Jersey, having worked my last few years in New Jersey for the War Department. And he said very politely, I would like you to consider the Kirksville opportunity. Ralph, Dr. Gerard, tells me there's something very special going on there. I have met Dr. Denslow and was very much impressed with him. Would you consider going for a year and writing a report for us, and we'll see that you get back to respectable academic life, as he put it. And with that, my wife and I, in November of 1945, decided to accept the position on that trial basis. And so in the December of 1945, I moved to Northeast Missouri.
And that lasted about how many years?
30 years.
30 years.
Yes. One year had led to another and another and another, and as I've often said, I found myself in exile in rural Missouri, having been born and raised in Philadelphia, my wife in New York City. And so at first there was something of a cultural shock from which we eventually recovered.
Do you recall, Kim, what your first undertaking in writing on the subject was called, and what, in other words, what was your first contribution to the public press, so to speak, on osteopathy?
Well, it was a research paper written by Dr. Denslow and myself, based on the first research we did together as collaborators. And this dealt with the measurement of reflex thresholds in the human spinal cord, related to what was then called the osteopathic lesion. Dr. Denslow had already developed methods with the help of Dr. Gerard and others for the study of electromyographic study of muscular contractions of the spinal muscles related to the areas of what we now call somatic dysfunction. And our first paper appeared in the American Journal of Physiology in 1947 and dealt with reflex thresholds in the human
Well, now, was that the article that caused a great deal of concern and interest? When I say concern, I mean interest among the profession and asking for more information from you?
No, their interest came later when I wrote my very first paper in the osteopathic, in the Journal of the American Osteopathic Association, also, as I recall, in 1947. And quite pretentiously, the paper was named the neural basis of the osteopathic lesion, as though this were the final statement of all of it. It turned out to be just a bare beginning and not entirely right. But nevertheless, it did stimulate a great response from the profession, who felt heartened and reassured that they were on the right track and that there was indeed a sound scientific basis
for their practice. Several printings of that particular publication then, I presume, that went out to the profession.
Yes, it was. Of course, it was widely. It's the journal of the profession and was widely read. And I did receive many letters and inquiries and even pilgrimages to Kirksville to meet and talk.
And you'd only been there then about 2 years.
About 2 years.
At that time.
Yes. And I should say, if I may interrupt, that the response was so wonderful from the profession that I think this was one of the things that persuaded me that this was time to make a real commitment and to remain in Kirksville. And I made it my practice from that time on. Every time I finished a piece of research, or my colleagues and I did, and after its publication in the scientific literature, I would then write a simple summary of it and draw the clinical implications for the profession. So I continually kept them in touch with our scientific progress and what it might mean to the practicing osteopathic physician.
I believe I read somewhere that about 1968 you became a distinguished professor of physiology.
Yes. It was quite an honor.
Yes, sir. I know you deserved it, though.
I think I was the first.
The first?
First to be named distinguished professor,
Professor. Well, I don't imagine there are very many contemporaries in that capacity now, in that respect, are there?
No, I think there are 2 or 3, yes.
Yeah, but not many. Yeah. So you, in 1975, what prompted you to leave Kirksville?
Mainly it was the unfortunate death of my wife. And it felt like a good time to close a very wonderful and exciting chapter in my life and move on to something else.
Before we entirely get away from Kirksville, I believe at one particular time back in the 60s you had an experience with the National Institute of Health in which you were given, or generally speaking, you were offered a grant of $1 million. Could you give me a little information about what that project was to entail?
Yes, I should say, by the way, that in 1947 we were given the first grant, as far as I know, by the National Institutes of Health
that is,
for
as
research.
Far as osteopathy or as far as Kirksville?
As far as osteopathy is concerned. I think that's true. And that grant was to Dr. Denslow for his research. So he was the first osteopathic physician to be given an NIH grant for research. So we had a whole series of grants from that time on. In fact, we were continually funded by the National Institutes of Health. In sometime in the 60s, I don't remember the precise time, Dr. Denslow and I agreed that we would make a proposal for the establishment of a clinical research center, which was something invited by the National Institutes of Health, in which we would be co-directors. He of the clinical aspects and I of the scientific research aspects. Mm-hmm. And the proposal written by both of us did indeed succeed, and we were granted, at least in correspondence, mm-hmm. The amount we had requested, approximately $1 million. But as we began preparing for the actual design and the setting up of facilities and standards and techniques, I had serious questions about the adequacy of the clinical standards that were going to be applied. And when I failed to get the improvements that I wished, I was no longer willing to commit my entire division of physiological sciences, which I then headed, to this project, and regretfully withdrew as co-director, which caused the collapse of the project. It was a very painful period, but I felt that for the protection of the people who worked under my direction, as well as for my own preservation of my own integrity as a scientist, mm-hmm. I had very little alternative but to say I could no longer participate under the circumstances, and the grant collapsed. And that was a very painful period for me, because this was going to be a very prestigious award to the college, and I understood the distress it caused not only to my colleagues and especially to Dr. Denslow, but to many people in the field. And for a while I was mm-hmm. persona non grata in the profession for having disappointed them. But I think eventually I was vindicated by the Board of Trustees of the college, whose matter of fact later complimented me for my courage mm-hmm. and for my willingness to stand up for what I regard as important standards.
Good. Well, Kim, you say in 1975 you moved on to the Michigan State University College of Osteopathic Medicine. It started about a year ahead of TCOM, I believe, about
That's
1969.
Right. It was the first of the university-affiliated medical osteopathic
mm-hmm.
school.
And that's the first time a lot of the allopaths knew they were osteopaths, I expect, at that time, particularly in Michigan. Well, tell me, I know a little bit about biocommunications, but I don't know anything about biomechanics. And I understand you were a professor of biomechanics at the college.
That's right.
Give us a little information about that.
Well, actually, it was the department that dealt with the science and art of manipulative medicine, mm-hmm. of osteopathic manipulation. So it dealt with the mechanics of the body. Specifically, most specifically, of the musculoskeletal system, of course.
I was going to say, that's where that concept came
That's
in
right,
practice.
yes. And it was then a term widely current, especially among so-called kinesiologists and sports medicine specialists and that sort of thing.
Yeah. So you were there then about 3 years?
About 3 years, yes.
And what prompted you to come to the sunny South? Or Southwest, at least?
Well, at least two factors. One, I was really quite tired of Michigan winters.
I can understand.
And I had a very attractive offer from a former student of mine, namely Dr. Ralph L. Willard, D.O., mm-hmm. who was at the time dean of the college.
Right.
And perhaps vice president.
Vice president of academic affairs, right.
That's right. Mm-hmm. And Dr. Willard had been in my very first class in Kirksville, graduating in 1949.
Oh, is that right?
Yes,
yeah.
yes.
Uh-huh.
And I was hesitant to accept, although I was very attracted to the climate.
Well, may I also ask, at that given time, were you a widower? Or had you remarried?
I had remarried,
I see.
yes. And when I say I was a little reluctant to make a move without being sure what was involved in my transfer.
Mm-hmm.
And Ralph wrote me a very full letter explaining what he expected of me, and mentioned the fact that he would like me to lead a task force dealing with the goals of osteopathic medical education.
Right.
And come up with a statement. And by telephone, I said, Ralph, at Kirksville for 30 years, I participated in the writing of many pompous manifestos and statements filled with pious platitudes that nobody could disagree with, which had no impact whatsoever, and I don't want to resume that activity anymore. Mm-hmm. And his statement was that this was very serious. Yeah. This is not going to be something to be filed away, but to have enormous impact eventually on the course of this college's history, and perhaps therefore on the profession as a whole. Well, send me a catalog, I said. It's a catalog of the school. And on looking through the list of the faculty, I recognized at least 30 or 35 names of former students.
Well, I heard that you had about 40.
That's right. At the time, about 40 students, including a few who are on the part-time faculty who are members of the Fort Worth Osteopathic Medical Center. Mm-hmm. And this frightened me because I thought this was some kind of an ambush that was about to happen. But I eventually, as you know, obviously accepted the position, and it's been most gratifying, and found that those faculty members who had been former students had for the most part forgiven me for my offenses as their teacher, and I have been very, very happy here. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of Dr. Ralph Willard, of course, your first contact, you say he was a student there at Kirksville. Then I presume at a given time later he was also your boss, wasn't he?
That's right. He was my dean at Kirksville College, succeeding Dr. R. McFarling Tilley. And later on, he was associate dean at Michigan State while I was there, and left only short time before I came. Yes.
Right. I'm interested in when you came here. Let's see, this was it 78 or 79?
78.
78. Did you get here before Med-Ed 1 was built, or right after?
It was completed, but not yet occupied, or yes, it was basically.
Where were your first offices?
As a matter of fact, I think our first Founders Day was held upon the opening of the in the fall, October, I think it was, in 1978.
1978, correct.
Yes. Yeah. But then the building had to be closed again to be completed. This was just
That's
for that occasion. Is that right? You remember those things better than I do.
Well, no, but you're right on target. I think that's correct. Now, you mentioned a moment ago about your first assignment in helping with the task force.
Yeah.
What role did you play in that?
I was the chairman of the task force, and our job, as given us by Dr. Willard, was to examine and come up with goals for osteopathic medical education that were appropriate to the times and to our culture, and especially to the state of Texas.
Yeah. Then have you had anything, when was that finalized?
It was completed sometime in 1979, approved by the faculty soon after, in the fall of 79, and then finally approved by the Board of Regents in the spring of 1980.
Now, this is some 8 years later. Are we still on target?
8 years later, after what?
After after you're setting the goals.
No. Oh, yes. Right. Are we on target?
Yeah.
I think we're still headed in the same direction, but there have been so many changes of circumstances that I think there's been some setting aside of the goals until we make adjustments in other areas. But I have every confidence that we will return. Certainly that is the intent of our president, Dr. Richards, who, by the way, is also a former student of mine.
Former student, yours, yes.
In the 60s, I think is when he graduated.
Yeah.
And he has given me every assurance that the promise of the goal statement will indeed be fulfilled.
Before we leave the subject entirely, could you elaborate a little bit more on your involvement with the goal statement?
Yes, this is some years ago now, but I'll try to reconstruct what happened. I proposed as chairman, I proposed to the task force that we begin with a question. Why are there two schools of medicine, two complete schools of medicine, two distinct professions of medicine? This is not true of any other professional arena. Law has one profession. The teachers have one profession. Dentists are in a single organizational body in this country, and so forth and so on. Why are there two distinctive professions? And I offered the premise as a start in discussion that the only reason for the existence of any profession is that it meets societal needs that are not met by any other profession. And so the question that follows then, which rather stunned the task force, was, are there any unmet needs in American healthcare? And our scientists were most reluctant to consider that this was even a possibility. And eventually, as we searched the literature, which we all did day in and day out, meeting weekly for several hours, eventually became clear that there were many gaps in our healthcare system and many inequities and many unsolved problems. And as one of the scientific members of the task force said, it was like discovering your mother isn't quite a lady, to discover that American medicine is not everything it's been touted to be. Such things as the fact that by our own standards we compared and very unfavorably in many ways with other advanced nations and even with some less advanced nations. We could go into details about what kind of gaps we found, but the task force was firmly convinced that indeed these areas needed to be addressed. And what we were seeing was that the healthcare system was totally absorbed in dealing with established late-stage disease. And the diseases with which we were most concerned were the chronic degenerative diseases, which were not, unlike infectious diseases, were not something you catch yesterday and become sick tomorrow. But these are the products, the culminations of whole lifetimes. And therefore we had to, the only hope was to move upstream and catch the early departures from health. And even better than that, to promote and enhance health. The premise being, the healthier you are, the less likely you are to become sick. And so that was eventually adopted as our strategy.
I see. Now, today, you have a different assignment, of course, 8 years later. And you're with an organization or a part of the college that we refer to as Korr.
Yes.
Center for Osteopathic
Research
and education.
That's right.
Korr.
Yeah.
Tell me, what is your particular assignment in that?
Now it's very, very small. This is now headed by Dr. John Peckham. I had written, as chairman of the then as then chairman of the self-study committee, we had come up with the recognition that a body like Korr was necessary. We felt that...
What year was that, Dr. Korr?
I would say sometime in the early 80s, 80, 81, 82, yes. At my age, one doesn't measure the years anymore. It's,
right.
It's kind of difficult.
Just the days.
They flow by, yes.
Right.
And we'd come up with a conclusion that this was a college of osteopathic medicine, that therefore the teaching of osteopathic medicine, its principles and its practice and its scientific foundations, should be the responsibility of the entire college, every department. And it seems strange to us that there was one department that was charged with the responsibility of teaching osteopathic theory and practice. It was the department then called Osteopathic OPP&P, Osteopathic Principles, Practice, Osteopathic Philosophy, Principles, and Practice. And so we proposed in a statement which I wrote to propose to the president, Dr. Willard, that we establish another task force to look into how to proceed with making the entire college osteopathic. So with the premise being that every department is, by implication, osteopathic. And so he established what was then called the Center for Osteopathic Education and Research, and somebody proposed, I think it was Dr. Harricle, as a matter of fact,
right,
that we reverse the order of
R and E. Dr. Harricle?
Dr. Harricle was then the chairman of the Department of OPP&P. And so he recommended it be changed to CORE as a kind of imitation of my own name and as a tribute to me, which I appreciated very much.
Pronounced the same way.
Pronounced the same way, and Dr. Willard accepted it, and I was appointed acting director of Korr.
I see.
And we wrote the founding documents, establishing its direction, its purposes, and how it would proceed.
Then Dr. Peckham
and Dr. Peckham,
you.
Yes, it was understood that the ultimate director should be an osteopathic physician. That's why I was acting director.
I see. Well, now you've been here 10 years.
10 years, yes.
10 years. What's your anniversary date? Do you recall?
Yes, I began my official work here September 1, 1978. So I've had my 10th anniversary.
You certainly have.
Yes.
You really have. Then you have, in medical education, now, we have a number of professors and associate professors in medical education. Of course, I understand now that your work is certainly confined. You're not as active as you were up until a couple of years ago.
I'm still as active, but in different directions.
In different direction, but not with this particular assignment.
Yes. I should remind you that my title, now I'm Professor of Manipulative Medicine as well.
Well, I was going to ask you this question when you mentioned OPP&P. That now has been changed to Manipulative Medicine.
That's right.
That was as a result.
The result of Korr's work, yes.
Of Korr's work.
During my term as director, yes.
Well, and that was along about 1982, 83 that
That's
they
right,
changed
yes.
The title of the department. Now the department has, you were at Kirksville when the current chairman of the department was there. He was your student. What do you know about him?
I know a great deal about him. I admire him enormously.
Tell us something about him.
He was a very, very bright young man.
And what's his name?
Gerald Dickey.
Gerald Dickey.
Yes.
And he's the son of a great friend of this school.
That's right.
Cliff Dickey.
Yes.
Well, now, he was the dean. What was he at? He was just in charge of that department at Kirksville.
He succeeded Dr. Paul Kimberly as chairman of the department when Paul retired.
Now, he also was one of your students.
Kimberly? Oh, no.
I mean,
Dr. Dickey, yes.
Dr. Dickey,
yes.
One of your students.
Yes. I think he graduated in the early 70s. I think it was about 1974.
Yes. I recall Dr. Jerry when he was thinking about entering the profession.
Oh, is that so?
Yes. In fact, he came and kind of looked TCOM over for size, but all we had was a little white house on the fifth floor of the hospital, and I don't blame him for not being too impressed. And so naturally he went to Kirksville, but we kept up with his career and his academic pursuits.
By the way, I visited the college several times in its early years when you were housed in the bowling alley.
Right.
As a I was here as a visiting lecturer, invited by Dr. Virginia Ellis and others to lecture to the scientists and the students and others.
Then, in addition to what you're doing for TCOM, what are you doing to stay active?
Well, I seem to be continue to be in considerable demand as a lecturer at various professional organizations. And as a matter of fact, I'm scheduled way up until June 1990.
June 1990?
Yes, for speaking engagements. Yes, that one in Vancouver. The American Association of Orthopedic Medicine, I think it is, which is an interprofessional group of DOs and MDs. I'm also visiting scholar for the American Academy of Osteopathy.
That's something we hadn't touched on.
Yes.
I'm glad you mentioned that.
I was designed the program for the Academy to be a counterpart to the visiting clinicians program. At the present time, I am the scholar, the visiting scholar.
Good.
And gave my inaugural program at the Ohio College last spring, and I'm scheduled for New England College next spring, for the Philadelphia College, for New Jersey, and for West Virginia, also months in the future.
Speaking of Dr. Willard, that's where he is now, at West Virginia.
Yes, indeed. I'm looking forward to seeing him when I visit there in early April, as I recall, yes.
You're mentioning your lectures and your speaking engagements. I recall in reading something about your great profession, your great background, that you not only once spoke to the American Osteopathic Association convention, you have spoken twice. Would you can you recall on the first and second occasion?
Oh, I've spoken many times.
No, you were
but twice as keynote.
Well, what I mean, forgive me. I'm glad you pointed that out. I meant keynote speaker, not just lecturer at any of the exhibits. But no, I mean as keynote speaker. What was your first year that you were the keynote speaker?
1948 in Boston.
An old speaking engagements. I recall in reading something about your great profession, your great background, that you not only once spoke to the American Osteopathic Association convention, you have spoken twice. Would you can you recall on the first and second occasion?
Oh, I've spoken many times.
No, you were
twice as keynote.
Well, what I mean, forgive me. I'm glad you pointed that out. I meant keynote speaker, not just lecturer at any of the exhibits. But no, I mean as keynote speaker. What was your first year that you were the keynote speaker?
1948 in Boston. An old carpenter's hall, which is a wooden building.
You'd only had 3 years of experience with osteopathy.
That's right.
That's great going.
I was so excited about what I was discovering that by then I had published several papers for the osteopathic profession.
I see.
And the response continued to be very warm and very cordial, and the profession has a very generous way of expressing its appreciation.
That's right.
Especially by repeated invitations, but also by honors and other expressions.
Right.
And so this was given, this was, I think, called the emerging, that first keynote address was called the emerging concept of the osteopathic lesion. And It was, I received a standing ovation. It lasted 8 minutes.
The ovation did?
Yes.
My goodness.
It was almost embarrassing. I discovered later that it had been sort of instigated by a fellow Texan of ours, a DO, namely Dr. His name escapes me at the moment.
Is he still living?
Yes, in Tyler. In Tyler.
Oh, you're talking about George...
George, you've forgotten too.
Well, for goodness sakes.
This is embarrassing.
It really is.
Yeah.
And he used to be one of my bosses.
Yeah.
He was one of the 7 members of the original board of directors.
Well, we'll think of it later on. He'll have to correct
He has a son, Jack...
I don't know the son, yeah.
Starts with a G.
Granger.
Granger, that's right.
George Granger.
George Granger. I helped you out a little bit, but
you sure did. I needed the G.
You deserve the credit.
Yeah.
Go ahead, sir.
So George admitted later on that he stood up and led the others in the applause and kept it going for some time, which is very, very interesting. The second keynote was 11 years later, 1959, when the theme of the profession, the theme of the convention was the unfolding horizons of osteopathic medicine, something like that. And so my address was addressed to
now,
that.
what year was that?
1959.
59.
Yes.
About 11 years later.
Yes.
You were still recognized.
Yes, and apparently the paper is still rediscovered by people. I get occasional letters saying it's still topical, still topical. Yeah.
Where was the convention that year?
I don't remember. I think it was Chicago. Yes. Probably at what was then the Stevens Hotel, became the Conrad Hilton years later. Yeah.
Right.
Yes. And so I dealt. My theme for that address was osteopathy, osteopathic medicine as a matter for decision, not for definition.
Speaking of definition, give me your definition of what is the difference between allopathic medicine and osteopathic medicine.
Well, I hope I don't embarrass you when I say that when I'm asked that question, as I am often, I decline to answer, because my next question to you is, well, first tell me what your perception of allopathic medicine is. And then people are stumped because it's not very well defined.
That's right.
I resist the question for other reasons, because I know it's not in your mind, but it is in the mind of many who are not familiar with osteopathic medicine,
right,
which you are, because the implication is it puts one on a defensive, because it implies, how dare you differ from what everybody knows is the standard. And so instead I say, I will tell you what osteopathic medicine is, and the difference will become evident to you as we go on.
Well,
and so I do.
I see. My layman's definition is, to a great extent, the difference mainly is, of course, we have the concept, the emphasis upon musculoskeletal relationship to the other systems of the body.
Yes.
And that the DO puts a little more emphasis upon that relationship than the MD does, or at least that's been the information that I've received.
I see that as a derivative of the philosophy, however. The heart of the philosophy being one, that the body is a unit, the person is a unit, and every part of the body influences every other part. And so when the musculoskeletal system, being the most massive system, really has a large piece to say about what goes on the rest of the body. But I think even more fundamental than that is the fact that osteopathic medicine relies on the inherent healing powers of the body. And its whole approach is to liberate and to reinforce, to disencumber those natural healing powers. And among the most important, most frequent impediments to the healing powers of the body, with which we are all endowed, are the difficulties, the dysfunctions that arise in the musculoskeletal system. So take care of those, you remove an important source of illness in the human being, and even prevent illness. So as in the goal statement, we emphasize the preventive significance of the osteopathic manipulative approach.
What are you doing in addition to your work here at TCOM?
I'm writing. I'm engaged in writing a book now.
Oh, you are? Can you
Yes.
share any of that with us?
Yes, delighted to. It started out to be a book on healthy aging.
Healthy aging.
Yes. And I discovered as I wrote about healthy aging that the way to get to healthy old age is to live your whole life in a healthful manner. And so the book is turning into a book on the creation of health, which will culminate in healthy old age. And I'm about somewhere between 2/3 and 3/4 done.
I see.
I'm working on the 11th chapter at the moment.
Oh.
And it began because I have been for many years asked the question, what is your secret? As you know,
Right.
I'm well advanced in years.
And you certainly don't look it.
Thank you. And I certainly don't feel it.
Yeah.
And so the question that I'm confronted with very often is, what is your secret? And so several years my wife and I decided, well, let's share the secret by offering workshops to older people. And although I was a frequent speaker before groups of elderly people and was invited again and again to talk about how to have a healthy old age, when we offered the workshop, nobody came. So we decided that I would write a book instead, which is what I'm doing now, hoping then we can, if the book succeeds, and then perhaps we can have workshops.
Are you planning on continuing the rest of your life in this area, or do you have...
Well, as perhaps has not been disclosed yet, this, I've decided, is my last academic year.
Oh, is that right?
So I will
You mean
retire.
I'm going to outlast you? Hopefully.
Yes. Yes, you will.
I hope to make it one more year at least.
So in August 31, I will end my academic career.
That'll give you 11 years then here.
That's right. And I will then have completed 53 years in medical education, 44 of them in osteopathic medical education. I will then be 80 years of age, and it's time to move on to other arenas, and that's what I'm about to do.
Well, my goodness. Well, Dr. Kim, distinguished professor of physiology and professor of medical education, it's been an extreme pleasure to have you here at TCOM for the last 10 years and culminated in our little visit together today.
Thank you, Ray. It's been a great pleasure. And old men love nothing more than to reminisce, especially about things they wish had happened.
Right. Thank you so very much.
Thank you.